well, good evening, everyone. I do want to begin the program by letting you know of a few things that we have coming up. The first thing is our virtual book talk for the month. It will be next Thursday at 6:30, so same time, so November 10th. And we will have with us Steve Cowie, speaking of his new book, When Hell Came to Sharpsburg. So join us virtually for that program. And then if you're in the Richmond area, come out and see us on November 14th. We will be at Bottoms Up Pizza for our November History Happy Hour. We'll have local historian Bibb Edwards speaking on a Black family's incredible story of violence, resistance, and resilience in the early days of Reconstruction. So mark your calendars for those two events. And then one last thing that I'll mention is that we do have our annual symposium. We have the information for that up on the website. Registration is now open. The symposium will be on February 18th. It's a day-long event. And the theme this year is the Civil War and Remaking America. So you can go to our website for more information on the symposium and what's going on surrounding that event. Now for tonight, I am pleased to introduce our guest, Dr. Wei-Siang Hsieh, who is a military historian who teaches at the U.S. Naval Academy. He received his Ph.D. from the University of Virginia and is the author of West Pointers in the Civil War, The Old Army in War and Peace. He's also the co-author with Williamson Murray of A Savage War, A Military History of the Civil War. In addition to this, he has written various essays and articles on military history and military affairs. And he's here tonight to speak with us about the Bluejackets project. So let's welcome our guest.
Thanks so much, Kelly. I assume everyone can hear me okay, so shoot me a note in the chat if that's not the case. It's great fun to do this. I think one of the perks of being a Civil War historian is there is actually a non-captive audience. I mean, many of us are college professors, including myself. I teach at the Naval Academy. Just to be clear, this is I'm obligated to do this. So none of this should be construed as any kind of official opinion of the United States Navy or the Naval Academy or employer. So this is entirely my own personal scholarly project, or in conjunction, obviously, with the Bluejackets. But many of us are teachers, and of course, our students are captive audiences, especially at a place like a service academy. And it's always nice to know that there are people who are willing to spend an hour of their evening voluntarily to listen to this, and the pandemic sort of obviously made a lot of that not possible, and hopefully this is one sign of us all slowly getting back to normal, even if it's through this sort of online format. So what I'm going to first do is I'm going to share. I have some slides. I am going to show that, and then I will basically get things going. Hopefully, great to see you, Chief. Hopefully everyone can see the slides. If there's any technical problems, you just maybe I will try to monitor the chat. I also say if you have substantive questions, backing me up are Damien Shields and David Gleason, the two maestros over in the UK who are it's much later over there, and they may chime in with questions and things like that while I'm trying to go through the formal presentation. So I just want to give everyone a heads up about that. I basically, the initial, the title I've given here is Common Sailors in Context. And to summarize this project, this is a big transnational, and involves, it's funded by the kind of the UK's equivalent of our National Endowment of the Humanities. It's really based out there. David Gleason is the primary investigator, but we've got, I'm the consultant with it. The Naval Academy Museum is part of it. Obviously, ACWM is helping out with it. So this is a project really of large interest. And the reason that that's the case is because the focus is on Civil War sailors, Civil War common sailors. But what a lot of people don't know is that amongst those 118,000 Bluejackets, and that's for the kind of the distinctive uniform item those sailors wore, 30% of them are of British or Irish ancestry. Approximately 15% are African Americans. Many of them having, not all of them, but many of them having been formerly enslaved. Obviously people who were free during the war who then enlisted in the Navy, but not just that. And you also have free blacks who joined the Navy, and that reflects the kind of maritime traditions of both the U.S. Navy and the Merchant Marine, where African Americans have an important role. And you've got, in addition, that's what, about 45%. You've got folks from all over the place. Later on, I will show a muster roll where you're going to see. On one sheet, you're going to see national origins: Norway, England, Canada, German, Scots, it's Irish, right? It's good, and Prussian, right? You're going to have extraordinarily large, diverse group of people, and that's one of the reasons why this project has been set up to kind of span. Actually, let me go to the next slide. There we go. So that's what I mean by the big context, okay, here. That this is a project that's designed to kind of deal with this very large and very diverse group of people, for lack of a better speak. Now, I'm sorry, I skipped over a few things. So the way it's going to do that is in the National Archives, what's already happened is that there are hundreds of thousands of sheets of muster rolls that have been digitized in the National Archives. As it's all 19th century material, I know some of you have talked about, you are kind of genealogical research, none of this stuff is printed, it's all in handwriting, it's all in handwriting manuscript form. So what the project is hoping to do is to basically digitize, they've already been digitized, it's to transcribe into, kind of machine readable texts, all of these muster rolls. And the goal to do that is that if we're able to basically transcribe all these muster rolls, you're going to be able to kind of manipulate that data in a much more readily fashion, and to do things like connect. So you have a muster roll, you have a list of sailors, you have their various types of information. I'll go into that later. That's on there. The plan is to then connect that to things like pension records that that are also available, that have also been digitized. And so you're going to have this website where people can look at these folks and sort of from one place access information about them, whether it's from pension records or just a muster roll itself, and then also look at them in the aggregate, right? So in addition to being able to look at them potentially as individuals, which we all, obviously, of course, we want to do. So in addition to looking at them individuals, though, by being able to look at them in the aggregate, we can also potentially better understand kind of the world of Civil War sailors. How to maybe get some insights and clues into, for example, how relations between different ethnicities, different races work on these ships. Unlike the USCG troops, these are not segregated ships, right? These are integrated crews, right? We will talk about ship where the entire crew is African American, but that's actually not a normal circumstance. You're gonna have also indications of African Americans, for example, escaping slavery, choosing names for the first time when they enter the Navy service. All these things are things that we can have access through these muster rolls. And this is where these common sailors sort of appear on the historical record for the first time. And a lot of times it's through them there that we can get the most information on them, right? So that's what I mean by the kind of there's a personal context, there's a big context. The digital context of this is that on top of this project, there's also an effort that, for any of you who have kind of background in things like machine learning or things like that, or about things like, Tesla's kind of auto driving car and things like that. What happens is we're going to have, lots of volunteers are going to transcribe these things, and all that what's called training data, right? These transcriptions will be married up with the image of the 19th century handwriting. And that will be then fed into a computer, essentially, that will basically use all those hand transcriptions, all those human transcriptions, to develop basically an algorithm that is able to automatically recognize and to transcribe 19th century handwriting, right? And the hope is that if this will never be perfect, right? There will always be errors and things like that. But the hope is that in the long term, what can also happen is you're going to have an algorithm or a machine learning model that's going to be capable to do a first pass transcription of this handwriting, right? And then for this project, after that's developed, then you can basically, human beings would have to, volunteers would still need to double check the work of the computer, because the computer is going to get things wrong sometimes, right? The computer is never going to be completely accurate. There's always going to be this unavoidable human check that will need to be on it. But that will then make the process of transcribing these records much faster, right? And be able to do that kind of a greater degree of velocity, for lack of a better term. And also, honestly, if that then just also, this is an academic project. So if we have an algorithm, a machine learning system that can transcribe 19th century handwriting, that's obviously of huge implications for not just this project, for the entire field of Civil War history, right? In 19th century American history, right? The ability for a computer to do kind of a rough transcription. So that's part of what, that's part of the digital context of this, of this project too. And finally, one of the reasons I'm making this presentation I'm hoping to do this to museums and things like that, is that all these fancy goals, all these great ideas are the indispensable piece of this are volunteers, right? The only way that this is going to work is if the project is going to be able to recruit sufficient numbers of citizen scientists. That's what the Zooniverse platform uses as a term, and it's completely true, who are willing to kind of sit down and go through these muster rolls and then enter in the computer system the transcription of them, right? That's, until we get enough volume of that, we're not going to be, the machine learning stuff is not going to work, right? And also initially, all that's going to have to be done by hand, right? And there's no way to do that at volume and scale through just kind of internal, people, professors and their students and stuff. That means really recruiting people, ordinary people like all of you who have an interest in this, especially those of ordinary folks who have experience with 19th century handwriting, who have experience with genealogical research and therefore are kind of comfortable with manuscript material, that's needed to kind of be able to make this all work. So I'm hoping some of you will be interested in this, and we'll go to the website, and I'll at the end of this I'll show you some of that. All right, so I do want to, before I do that though, I do want to give you some examples of kind of the payoff, right? And so these are, if you go to the Civil War Bluejackets webpage, which I think is in the Zoom announcement, you'll find a blog there, and everything I say here is really just kind of a summarized version of the blog. But there are a few blog entries that actually basically show you, even from one ship, like one set of muster rolls, how much information we can glean and why a lot of this can be potentially so important. So what you see here is a map of the USS Albemarle's crew, the origins, where their geographical origins are. So this is a vessel that's captured in March of 1862. It's then impressed into the U.S. Navy. It becomes the USS Albemarle, obviously, and then it's put on blockade duty off the coast of North Carolina. So we know from the muster roll that are, by the way, let me show you that. Let me go. So this is a muster roll. This is from a different ship. Okay, this is what they look like. I know a lot of you, maybe the screen is not that big, but it's basically a big standardized form that has the name, date of enlistment, and various other things. But let me go back. So, all right, so from that transcribed muster roll, we know that of the 33 sailors who are on the ship, what's most interesting about this ship is that by late 1864, the crew is entirely African American, right? And that's not by any means a normal set of circumstance. And you see here basically a map that indicates by basically the density, how dark the color is, where where these sailors come from. You'll see most of them come, as you might expect, from North Carolina, right? We'll talk a little bit about that shortly, but not all of them. We also know that if you notice, one of the more darker shades is Maryland, and a decent, many of them come from Baltimore. I'm sorry, and we also know that most of them come really from the slave states, right? All but three. Okay. So, we get a sense of the kind of the geographical origins of the crew, how they're recruited. We also get a sense of potentially, we also have their ratings and their rank, essentially. Basically, we have a sense of what opportunities for advancement they've been able to obtain in the Navy. So one of the things that we've seen in the musters already is, for example, the fact that while white mariners usually are able to come in at kind of a higher rating, things like a seaman, right? Most of the time, African-American sailors are sort of inducted in at lower ratings, like a sort of a boy or a landsman and things like that. So all these things we can see from the muster rolls and their records. And to give you another indication, so if we, okay, here is, so we have here, indication of which sailors come from free states, which sailors come from slave states, right? And here's a map of basically on the left hand side, these are the modern county boundaries. The red star is New Bern, right? New Bern is captured fairly early in the war. And you'll see also, we can see even the origins at the county local level of where these African-American sailors come from. I want to point you to the map on the left is the county boundaries. I guess you just kind of imagine it. The map on the right is the actual real topography. And what you'll see is that all of the sailors are coming from coastal regions. And it's clearly related to the fact that the Union Navy is able to enforce the blockade, has access to these coastal regions, therefore has access to these personnel. They have the opportunity to enlist in the Navy, unlike individuals who are living much further inland. And of course, also, since these African Americans are living in coastal regions, they're probably more connected to the maritime economy and things like that, right? So this is just from one ship's muster roll. This is just from one ship, right? You can already glean this much information. And the hope is that as we transcribe, as we digitize all these muster rolls, they become not just images that are sort of stored in the National Archives, but text, readable text by the effort of sort of citizen scientists. We're going to be able to know a lot more people, a lot more ships, and a lot more individual stories, and a lot more collective stories too, right? So that's one. All right, so this is the USS Argosy. This is a muster roll. I don't know if you can see it very clearly. At the top, you'll see the date from December 31st, 1864. This is the original documents that we're trying to convert, right? Trying to transcribe, right? They're kind of standardized. Well, most of them are standardized. Earlier in the war, they're not so much, but by this point during the war, they're pretty standardized. And part of the challenge is being able to kind of read the handwriting, decipher it, and things like that. The website does have lots of tools to help the volunteers figure things out, but it does involve a certain amount of legwork, right? For lack of a better term, it does go faster the more you do it. For those of you who do genealogical research, you certainly know about this. That's why we're hoping that a lot of you have experience in that are going to be willing to help out with this, because it's the 19th century handwriting. As someone who teaches college students, I don't know, Drew Faust, the famous Civil War historian, I think she recently wrote an article about the New York Times about realizing how many of her students now at Harvard can't read cursive. And because they can't read cursive, the things you used to do as a history professor to introduce your students to primary source documents, it changes the dynamic, right? But so that's part of the challenge here. But it's not all, right? It is, at least there are lots of commonalities and things like that. So this is the USS Argosy. It is not a captured ship. It is a kind of a tin-clad steamer. It is commissioned in March of 1863, and unlike the coastal blockading USS Albemarle, it is part of the Mississippi Squadron. So it is a brown water vessel. It is on the Mississippi River, and that's where it conducts the war. And one of the reasons why we're hoping to, we think this project has got great significance is because the Union Navy has such a interesting and wide variety of missions. Right. Some of it is the enforcement of the blockade. Some of it is the pursuit of Confederate privateers far away from the shores of the United States. Part of it is also, though, the Union Navy vessels that fight on inland waterways. Right. and you have obviously potentially different types of personnel, different types of sailors with different origins who are in all these places. And this is an example of that. So the Argosy has 70 men. I have here, hopefully you can see it. I know everyone's, when you do see share screen thing. This is one entry. This is of Otto Anton, okay? And basically you see the date he's enlisted, the place where he's enlisted. This actually isn't complete. There's actually the page goes on, and so there are remarks, and in those remarks we actually find in the muster roll that although he dies shortly after enlisting, he enlists in August of 1864. He actually perishes in November 1864, and you see things in the remarks that I couldn't fit on this slide. Basically, what his prior career was. Some of these folks come from maritime careers. They have maritime experience, but not always, not necessarily. And things like distinguishing marks. I decided not to, for the purpose of time. I didn't want to run too long. But if you look at the webpage, there's an interesting, fascinating blog entry on tattoos and distinguishing marks. Right, and that gives us kind of a window into the world of common sailors that honestly historians don't usually have a lot of insight and access to unless it shows up in these kinds of government records. But these government records are buried in thousands upon thousands of pages of these muster rolls. So how do we make that accessible? We're hoping to use methods like these to kind of transcribe it. So it becomes accessible not just to sort of academic historians, but to ordinary people and anyone who's interested in any of these things. The second one is George Chisholm. Oh, I'm sorry. What I also forgot to mention about Otto Anton is his. This is, I think it's not in this. His country of origin is Norway. The next individual is George Chisholm. His country of origin is Scotland. Also, in his case, we have a pension record. So not only do we know something about his wartime service, we have a sense of from those of you who aren't familiar with. Union soldiers and sailors are eligible for pensions, but when they apply for pensions, they have to prove their disability. And usually that involves having to give evidence of some kind, and it frequently involves them actually giving narratives, like giving their own accounts of their wartime service. What's good about that for historians is that means that it gives us kind of them talking in their own words about what they did during the war, right? And it's preserved. It doesn't kind of vanish off into attics that no one sees again. It's actually all in the National Archives. So in his case, we have some information about that, and we know, for example, that he ends up in Los Angeles. He ends up in California in the early 20th century. So he lives for a while. And we get a sense of kind of what happened to him after the war and things like that. And this is part of where born. You'll see, as I mentioned, Norway, England, Canada, Germany, Scotland, Prussia, Ireland. There's also, when you look at the African Americans who are also on this muster roll, you'll see amongst them a wide variety of state origins: Tennessee, Mississippi, Maryland, North Carolina, Kentucky, Louisiana, Virginia, Arkansas. What you'll see is you get a sense of also all the kind of these African Americans' prior life history before they joined the Navy. So many of them have origins in sort of the Upper South, but they end up enlisting in Louisiana and Mississippi. So clearly, what happened to them was they were sold by their earlier owners, right? And sort of when Union armies took over those territories, they were then able to enlist in the Union Navy. So you have, this is the kind of, the problem when you're studying the history of African Americans, obviously, is a lot of times they're not, they don't show up in the historical record because they're not allowed to, right? Because they're enslaved. And a lot of times, even those records are very much in the hands of their owners, their slave owners. And obviously that's all not from their perspective. Now, this is obviously still from a formal US government perspective, but at least it gives us some more information. And you start to see when they enlist, they can do things like choose their family name, right? And that becomes a way of them kind of asserting their identity in a way that they didn't have access to beforehand. And this is where we get to see that occur. And if they have a pension record, then we can even get we could get even more resolution and knowledge about their lives and things like that. And this seemingly bureaucratic, abstract, impersonal, for those of you who are veterans and things like, all this paperwork and stuff like, there are human beings behind it, right? And if we, the hope is that we're going to be able to use the paperwork to kind of uncover some really important kind of personal human stories and things like that. All right, let's see. So that's okay. That was what I'm going to do now is I am going to share something else. Give me 1 second. I'm going to share you the website. Now there are tutorial videos and things like that. I'm not going to show that because I know I've done, there we go. This is, I know from experience, having had to teach in the horrible online format, that when you do things like try to show a video on Zoom, a lot of times the internet just can't handle the bandwidth. So I'm just going to show the website. So if you go there, there's lots of information. There's also a tutorial, and that should be hopefully the screen you can see. So welcome aboard Civil War Bluejackets, right? And then you'll see basically lots of information on what the muster sheets look like, the different workflows, there are different categories. So the way it's kind of organized is you choose what workflow you want to work on, like names or things like that. And then what you have to do is here in this screen, and I'll show this in my other slide, you have to do things like draw a box around the text you're transcribing. And the reason, just to explain that, this is for those computer scientists, right? So when you draw this box, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but when you draw that red box and then you type in the text, the computer kind of says, okay, this is a pattern. Right. And what the computer can do is that when you aggregate thousands upon thousands upon thousands of these red boxes with text inside it, the computer can learn how to distinguish between an A and a T, right, with a reasonable degree of certainty, right? So a lot of this stuff was pioneered by Google, right? The early version was, could you teach a computer to do something like recognize a cat? Right. And the way you taught them to recognize a cat or a dog was you gave it millions of images of cats and dogs, and then it kind of like brute force learned what the patterns were like. So we're trying to apply that principle here to handwriting, to 19th century handwriting, and to able to kind of have that long-term thing. Right. There is more instructions about how to do this. Right. And I also point out that, I think sometimes this looks forbidding to folks. When you get in there, I'm going to close this. There's always these useful help boxes. This is an example of that. There's like a field guide. We've noticed a lot of volunteers haven't been big fans of looking at ratings or the ranks, because I think a lot of that is things like coal hauler is kind of odd, things that are specific to the 19th century Navy. But there's Damien Shields has created a great and pretty user-friendly guide for what types of jobs that these sailors might have. And that will help out with that, right? So that's let me stop sharing this and I'll show you the red box thing is I think that's on my last slide. All right, so this is hopefully a bigger version, right? So you can see here, this is the red box, and you see this is Atkins, right? That's the last name there. And so that's what folks are going to be, that's an example of what you would actually be doing on the website. All right, so I think okay, we're about half an hour. I went over a little bit, but not too much. All right, I wanted to get this to 25 minutes. The best thing, I guess I will just look through the chat box. Let me stop sharing this. Give me a moment. Let me make this window larger, and hopefully you have questions. And I will try to get through as many of these questions I can as our allotted time. Oh, we have some transcribers. Well, thanks so much. So, oh, Ms. Boudel is great to Annapolis. I was there teaching earlier today. So I'm looking for questions. That's why I'm. Can we search for individual ships to transcribe? I don't, maybe I'll let Damien, I don't think so, because I think it's, let me unmute him. Can he unmute himself?
Unmute. Oh, I can't unmute. I'm unmuted now. Hey, yeah, no, you can't do that, but potentially in the future. At the moment, it's alphabetically, so it's all the vessels that are currently on the Zooniverse are vessels that begin with the letter A. So it's a bit like Sesame Street.
Okay, you actually answered that question. I'm sorry, I didn't see it in that. Okay, Ms. Nichols, how did the crew of the USS Albemarle become only men of color? I'll let Damien kind of comment on this. I'm guessing it's because of where it was operating, honestly, and since it was kind of off the North Carolina coast, it just kind of worked out that way. But I'll be curious if Damien has a maybe, and I don't know if you guys have uncovered more about what exactly happened there.
Sorry, I muted myself again. Yeah, we intend to look more into that, but yeah, that's precisely what we think it is, that it's likely that it's because it's where it's serving, and it appears to have been a storage vessel for quite a considerable amount of time. So if it was following a similar pattern to the way USCT regiments were being used in the army, for example, where, a lot of the time they were being denied combat opportunities and being used for heavy manual labor, that there was this sort of prejudice against them, that there may be a higher level of African-American sailors on these kind of storage and supply vessels. So that's one possibility, but early days for us to check that one out.
I'll just say, related to that, I mean, one of the fascinating things about the Navy, I think, is that it is such an international organization. It's literally operating all across the world. A lot of people associate that with the modern America and kind of the United States' current military footprint. But you'll have Navy ships in places like Hong Kong, in China. I mean, basically, because the Navy is actually fulfilling a lot of roles that the State Department do, basically. And so these are small. They're not large groups of ships, but they are all over the place. And there's always a chronic need of sailors. The Navy is a very manpower intensive operation. And so although it's so international, a lot of times it's recruiting based. It's basically, you try to recruit people you find where you're at, right? So, Ted Alexander, who used to, sadly late Ted Alexander, who used to be the chief historian at Antietam, he did a project involving Asian Americans who ended up in U.S. Civil War regiments, which was kind of a big surprise to me. And I remember talking to my friends, like, where did these guys come from? And well, they came from basically folks who had become parts of ships' companies, a lot of times of merchant mariners in places like China, right? And so a lot of times the recruiting of these sailors can be very, very local, depending on just where they operate, right? And that's one of the things, this very transnational, that's the fancy academic term, this kind of very global institution, but which has a lot of times they're very local, geographically local sort of elements to this. And I think that perhaps is one of the examples of that. Adam, is it known who record information on the muster rolls? I've always just assumed this is the officers. You got some lieutenant who does this, Dave? I mean, or maybe a clerk. Is there a rating with the clerk, or does it kind of vary?
Yeah, again, that's something that we're looking at in detail, is the actual process by it. Petty officers seem to do it a bit as well. But whether it's a dedicated person on the ship is something that actually we're still looking at. But it's never, for example, the crewmen. So it's always going to be at least probably a senior petty officer.
Jan Murphy, we'll be able to look at the entire page as we go through the transcription process. I like to compare letter shapes across the entire page as I work. I mean, the short answer is yes. All right, David.
Yeah, it is. So even though the workflows are restricted to each column, so if you decide you're doing names or ratings, as Wayne was saying, we thought it'd be a bit mean if people are volunteering their time and you can only see the name or one element. So you can see the whole ship. You can see the information, that the whole page. You can see the information on the individual and the other people around them in their context. So you'll always see all of the information, even if you've decided to say just work on names or just work on their ratings, for example.
Also, there is a kind of a forum where the volunteers hang out. And so if you feel, for example, that you're new at this and that a lot of this is just really hard to read, and difficult, there is actually folks who will help you, right? And to kind of ease the learning curve and stuff like that, right?
And we'd like to talk forum. Yeah.
So it's we're hoping to build a community of sorts, right? Obviously. So Donna Dolan, I volunteer for Latter-day Saints to key records from handwritten originals to templates, which are then accessible to anyone. I have keyed muster rolls from the Civil War, as well as payment slips and pension requests from both federal and Confederacy documents. This opportunity with Bluejackets right up my alley. Is there any cooperation in place between LDS and Bluejackets? There is not, but I'd be happy to correspond with you, about this some more. We're looking for partnerships, honestly, with museums, genealogical groups, to kind of get the word out, to find people who are interested in this. So I'd be happy to chat more about things like that. Randy's question, yes, the officers are white, right? So it is, in some ways, the Navy these are integrated crews, right? In that sense, and we have some evidence of African Americans who at least can rise somewhat. They're kind of not at the very bottom of the ladder, but the officers are all white, and there is definitely a kind of there still is a racial hierarchy. I would point out, though, arguably the reason the crews are integrated is that you should not necessarily think of this as any kind of ideological hostility to racism. It's arguably more a practical matter. You can't actually run. I mean, ships, even merchant ships, are complicated machines, right? Everyone has to work together. They're all in close quarters. It's not practical to try to segregate something like this. I mean, you could, and so there's no attempt to do that really, and that's the case of the kind of the civilian merchant marine. That's the case of the Navy too, right? But the officers, as in the Army, the officers tend to be middle class, and they would all be, they would essentially be all white. Except I think there are a few exceptions, but very few. I think Emily's question: will a supervisor sign off on our work? The short answer is no. We trust you. Okay, I mean, we have to trust you. There is a system of quality control. Damien can. I know how many. There are multiple passes on the same muster roll. Right. That's the quality.
That's right. When it's 5 retirements. So that's the kind of the control. So that everything is done 5 times by 5 different people. And the reason for that being that if one person mightn't be sure of something, we all make mistakes. I know I certainly do when I'm doing transcriptions. Or if people are not clear about something, it's just a consistently putting up these images for different people to look at, for more eyes. So it just hugely reduces the potential for error on it. And as we progress through the information science aspect of it, it'll actually be the citizen scientists, as you were saying in the talk, Wayne. It'll be the citizen scientists who are the supervisors signing off, and we hope the computers work as it goes forward. So they're the kind of 2 main stages that we're hoping to go through with it.
Yeah, I also point out, this is for those of you who don't know this, there are other crowdsourced things. I know the Huntington Library has done something involving kind of cryptography, Civil War era cryptography. You'll see the Zooniverse is this whole platform. And one of the early collaborators on this was an individual from NOAA, where they were actually collecting historical weather data for climate research. So this is, there is kind of an established model for using lots of volunteers. And it really is, it all depends on the volunteers, because the volume of material, it would be impossible to have so-called professional academic historians to prove this. There's just too much, right? And it's been successful, honestly. I mean, everyone kind of putting their head together. And I'll also say, as a historian who has worked a fair amount with manuscript material, in all forms, manuscript, the horrible ancient hand crank National Archives microfilm. Some of you may know this, right? A lot of times it's the volunteers who have the most stamina, who are able to just burn through this stuff that, the PhDs can't deal with. So that we're hoping to find those folks, right? And some of it, I think, is this is kind of a particular skill to be able to go through a lot of this stuff at volume. Bill and Sue Fisher, thanks you so much for sharing it. Hopefully, if anyone has questions, feel free to shoot any of the team members. Why is the scope limited to the Union Navy only? I'm pretty one, the Confederate Navy is so much smaller, and I don't know if you know offhand, Damien, but I assume many of their records were probably destroyed in the fire in Richmond at the end of the war.
Yeah. The Union Navy records are substantially complete. The Union Navy also has a very strong position in comparison, for example, to say the Army, in that the bulk of their key records relating to men's service are digitized now. So from the rendezvous reports from when men originally enlisted in the towns and cities, through to the muster rolls of their service, and the majority of their pension files afterwards are all digitized. So they're a unique opportunity within, apart from being a really interesting group in and of themselves because of who they attract into the service. They present a unique opportunity that isn't offered by, say, the Confederate Navy or the Union Army or anything like that.
And related to that, this is part of the complexity I just point out to everyone is this, all this stuff was scanned, and that took a lot of effort. And I think there are various grant programs that went to that, right? But that's the first step, just putting it into an image that we can put on the internet. The second step is, okay, well, you have the image. I think many of you probably have, we have, how many thousands of photos do I have of my children on my phone, right? How do I sort them all? And things like that. So, this is an effort to try to make that mass of information sensible and useful, right? And it just requires kind of this large community effort to do that. Yes, yeah. I mean, if you read novels like Moby Dick or White Jacket by Melville, right? Obviously, you've got Black sailors in the Navy. That's all before the war too. So Sam's question: will there be any other Navy-related documents available in the database? So I know, Damien's pension records. Is there anything else that potentially could be linked later?
Yeah, we're hoping to link. So that's one of the big elements of the information science they're looking at, aside from the machine readable text, is to try and link these guys so that you could look up whoever the serviceman you're looking at and try and trace them across the rendezvous reports, which are also digitized. So from when they were initial enlistment through all the different vessels they served, taken off the muster rolls and into the pensions. So there are a few other naval records that are digitized. Things like hospital tickets. There's digitization for that. Some of the rendezvous report cards are digitized. So there's a whole kind of series of them, and really we're going to try and link as much as we can. There's limitations to that. There's only so much you can do if someone is called John Smith, and there might be huge numbers of them. But we are hoping that we can do it for a lot, which will be pretty revolutionary, I think, in terms of allowing you to access all this information that will trace. A lot of these guys are from the poorest elements of society, but these incredible records allow you to trace them in a way that you really can't do for any other people in the 19th century from that class level.
Also, I just want to point out, I just want to make this clear, and Damien can speak to this too. This is an academic project. This is not a for pay, right? So we are not, this is not ancestry.com. All this stuff is going to be publicly available for scholars, for ordinary people. the grant has kind of provisions for things like, hosting in the long term and things like that. So we're not. I'm not saying anything's bad about like answer, but we're not just trying to get volunteers and then we're gonna sell this for $10 million to certain institutions and things like that. That's actually not what this is about, right? This is a real sort of nonprofit project. Looking at other questions. Yeah, so I think Donna's question. Yes, they're all up. I mean, they're all key. So when you go in there, it will give you the next muster roll. Right. Up.
Yeah.
4%. I think that's right, Damien?
Yeah, spot on, Jackie. Yeah, 4% of our we've gone through 4% of the A's so far. So there's lots of opportunities, even if you're particularly keen on one of the A vessels. There's plenty of opportunities still to get involved with the A's.
It's a big volume, so it's gonna. I mean, this is a years-long kind of project. So we're not expecting to finish this soon, right? So this is going to take a while. Damien, do you have a number of volunteers? Was it 500? Is that the number you had for signups?
Yes, we are approaching at the moment. 580 on the nose. We're at present. 580 volunteers registered.
And you can do as much or as little, right? So don't feel that if you sign up that you're committing yourself, or and we understand. I mean, people are busy, or maybe you just realized it's not agreeable, but it's all, we're just hoping people give it a try and hopefully just keep on plugging away at it. All right, I think that's most of the questions, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Are we missing
John,
anything?
with some info on the Confederate muster rolls. One of the other things I've noticed, actually, with some of the, just on the topic of the surviving Confederate rolls that I've seen, the degree, and it's actually something that you see in things like pension records as well. What does survive tends to have significantly less detail than you get with the US material. So the huge degree of information, a lot of the Confederate stuff I've seen is just lists of names, although I'm sure there's probably more out there.
Yeah, and Bill and Sue Fisher, I just saw, if you only have 15 minutes for it, yeah, I mean, you can just do one. I mean, that's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
I mean, you need to do it at a computer, really. Honestly, you're not going to be able to do this on a mobile device, right? On a phone. But I mean, so you want kind of a high resolution machine and the ability to zoom in and stuff. That would help a lot, right? But beyond that restriction, it doesn't necessarily take a huge amount of time, and every little bit does help. Damien, you want to respond to Donna's question about?
Oh, yeah, I see that. Yeah, we went through a big beta testing process, Donna. So when we were doing this, we did an initial pilot survey on a number of the city class ironclads that were, they're quite famous vessels that served in the Mississippi during the war. But when we moved over to Zooniverse, we had to go through you have to go through a process with Zooniverse for them to allow you to put it up. The number of images we would have to retire was a major topic that we were discussing, and we actually spoke to other projects as well. So one other project is quite similar to us, had a retirement count of 3, for example, and they regretted that they said, oh yeah, we don't think it's enough, because you can have one person who's not sure, one person who has it one way and one person who has it another. And so after lots of discussion, 5 was what we went to. It could have been a lot worse. It's up, you can go up as far as 15, which was we thought was way too much. So one of the things with it, and we imagine this is going to happen over the course of the project though as well, is that the Zooniverse project itself will evolve. So because we're going to, the more volunteers we get, the more information we get, the further down the road we get with the information science team, what we require off of the citizen scientists is going to evolve. So there'll be a consistent kind of evolution of the process on Zooniverse as well.
Jackie's question is the Naval Academy's. I mean, the short answer is, honestly, I'm hoping to do some of that. But honestly, it's probably going to need to wait till the summer because our midshipmen are pretty busy during the school year. So we, I mean, Damien, this really went live in early September.
Yeah, exactly. Yes,
right?
yeah. So we're still pretty early.
By that time, the academy semester had already been. And I just point out, I have to be, as a U.S. government institution, we have to be. The Academy Museum is actually definitely an official partner, right? But there can't be any kind of official endorsement and things like that. So it all has to be kind of volunteer. But we will have in the long term, and also just to let everyone else know, there is going to be related to that. There's going to be at the end point of this, we hope to have a volume of scholarly essays and a conference that's going to be open to the public, right, to kind of show the research that can be built off of this database of this information, like the first cut, so to speak, right? And we haven't really planned a lot of that. That's down the road, but there's a decent chance that might be in Annapolis or Richmond or someplace like that in this area, right? And that's where some of that institutional support is going to show up, right? Or even some of you may or may not know the Navy's working on a new museum. They're trying to raise the money for it, when that's going to take a while. I think Congress finally gave the line. It's near the Navy. If any of you know, the current Navy Museum is in the Navy Yard, which is a restricted, it's a military installation. It's very complicated. Again, they're going to build this facility outside of the boundaries of that security cordon. And so my hope is actually, whenever that gets spun up, this maybe can have some kind of connection to that, but that's all down the road. Emily's question, I have talked to some, I think is it San Diego State or is University of San Diego? I can't, not UCSD, but I've talked to some schools that have Ward Society programs, and we're just trying to get the word out. But right now, it's, that's a great idea. But if you know of places that would be really interested in this, please send a link, or if you just want to send me the name, that would be great, and I can touch base with them and see if they're interested. I think Damien, you said, for example, you've done a lot of outreach, and it's not really predictable who's interested. I think Delaware geological folks were really, it's a little bit serendipity, right? And I don't think COVID helps. I think a lot of museums are still in kind of odd in between spaces, and traditionally we would just go and hit the roundtable circuit. And there's not much of a roundtable circuit right now, I'm sorry to say. So a lot of these things have become a little bit more challenging. Okay, yeah. So I think Donna, I think Damien, you can correct me. It's basically the 5 are just done to check each other, right?
Yes, So the computer. The information scientists, there's code that comes out, and I'm not an information scientist, so this is about as technical as I'm able to get with this. but so the 5 iterations of it are checked against each other. So if four people have written John and the 5th person has written David for a certain thing, for example, it'll say the John is what's likely to be the correct one. So that's the reason for the 5, and then it's so a determination is made rather than all five being available in the final database. Only one will be, if that makes sense.
Kelly, would you like to make some final remarks? Again, thanks so much to everyone who participated for all the great questions. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much. That was excellent. Sounds like a fascinating project, and I was sitting here listening to it, wondering if like even high school students, if this is something that teachers could have their classes do.
Yeah, actually, Damien, I didn't think of the K through 12 angle, and now that I think about it, at least I should have thought.
Yeah, that's a really good idea, Kelly. Yeah, we should definitely look at that.
Well, I'm thinking it's something that we might be able to put out in our educator newsletter. Just tell them about the project. I know years ago we had a group of high school girls from one of the parochial schools transcribe letters in our collection, and it was a good opportunity for them to learn a little bit about just what goes into historical research, and they really just grabbed hold of the project and got super excited about it. So I can see this being something that teachers can just use in their classrooms to teach a little bit about the historical process.
That would be fantastic.
But this, yeah, and there is the issue with the not knowing the cursive as well. Yeah, that's where I thought I saw the word cursive in there. If they can read cursive, yeah.
That's a real problem. Although I would say I have students who's still writing it. It's not completely gone yet, and I think it's actually making a bit of a comeback, honestly. So maybe that's something, it's not completely doomed, right?
Oh, ask Gettysburg College. That's a good suggestion too.
That is. Actually, I'm going to maybe see Pete Carmichael in a few weeks. Actually, I should talk to him about this.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, and thank you, Damien, for joining us from across the world. And thank you to everyone who tuned in for tonight's program. We are very pleased to have you with us, and it's through the support of our program attendees, members, and donors that the museum is able to keep offering programs and engaging with the public. So we love having your support. If you're not a member, think about becoming a member of the American Civil War Museum. And with that, I will say good night to everyone. Thank you, Dr. Hsieh.